Following is my conversation with Kate Nadolny. Kate is a senior executive with PVH Corporation, a global leader in apparel industry. Kate is responsible for strategy, innovation, operations, digital transformation. We in this conversation take a look at in the apparel industry coming out of COVID, what are the challenges involved and how to solve those challenges using digital first, digital transformation methods. We talk in very practical terms, in terms of organizational capabilities, business models, technical capabilities, skills that organizations need, and new ways of thinking and how to bring it all together, and what role data, AI, and other tools can play. I hope you will enjoy this conversation. I definitely enjoyed it very much. And now, without any further ado, here is my conversation with Kate Nadolny. Kate, how are you?
I'm good, Amjad. How are you?
I am doing good. I'm doing good. I'm so looking forward to this conversation with you. We have been talking about it for a month or so now.
Yeah, me as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So look, I think we can start with you are in an industry that has seen a lot of sort of stress and robustness and resilience put to test during the COVID timeframes. So I think in that context, maybe we can start with what does innovation and resilience and robustness, what does it mean? What does it feel like and look like? So just to get the conversation going, let's maybe start from there.
Thank you. Well, retail was a tough business well before COVID. So I think it's only, I would say, accelerated, as with many industries, some of the things that are really critical for the business to continue to meet the demands of the consumer. So in terms of resilience, in terms of innovation, the key tenets and the things that we were looking at prior to COVID are still the same. How we're going to execute them, what order we're going to prioritize some of these things, and how we're going to change the mix of key innovations going forward, I think is what's really changed. So, for me, for my team, we've always been sort of focused, we'd say, on three main things. Those three main things are MarTech solutions and personalization, AI for inventory management and automation, and omni-channel and what the future of best in digital in-store really means. Those three tenets are absolutely the same, but was opening up store inventory to online and vice versa as important before COVID? No, you just worried about forecasting better. And then you were able to figure out how you were going to preempt your demand and be able to buy into it. Now, as we look to the future, what's going to happen in Q4 when customers have been buying online for the last year or so, and all of a sudden they need to go Christmas shopping? Have they really moved to online, or are malls all of a sudden exciting and new? And are they going to shift to do what's new and cool, which is what was old? So those are the types of things that I think are new questions and new headlines underneath some of those key tenets as we think about what we need to do to be agile in the future. That's for sure.
How to best prepare for that, right? There are no precedents or historical data. So sitting here, and if people now want to say, well, how to think about it? What is the best preparation that somebody can do to prepare for it?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. So I always say, when just referring to my own life and my own career and everything, I've always said I always have a 5-year plan, but I change it every month. And I think that's exactly what's happening in the retail industry right now. we have to continue to have those 5-year plans. Many companies that are out there in the retail space are really large behemoth companies. They can't be as agile as small startups, but they have to still think that way. So they need the 5-year plan, but they can't set the 5-year plan and wait 12 months until the next budgeting cycle to make those decisions. We need to start saying, okay, every month, are we iterating? Are we taking something off the plate that isn't as important anymore and bringing on something that's new we need to try? Are we not looking at projects in 3-5 years increments? Are we instead looking at it as, how do we do a 6 to 8 week sprint? And how do we learn something and then know we're directionally correct, so keep going, and not wait until we can be 100% correct to make bigger decisions and investments? I think that's what's going to need to happen in this ever-changing and somewhat volatile world. I think all of this has always been underlying the retail business. I think it didn't become as commonplace until COVID. It was, all the signs were there that things needed to move, but having to move overnight wasn't expected. Now everyone's realized, okay, I had to move overnight. I'm probably going to have to move overnight again. And what does that mean? And what have I learned about being able to pivot quickly? And how does that become a piece of my plan as I go forward?
No, that's very insightful. We even, Kate, when we talk to other colleagues in the industry, so you get feedback from like all over the map. We'll hear, well, I wish I could do better demand forecasting. I wish that I know my inventory position a lot more accurately. I wish the universe hadn't taken off 1/3 of the word cotton, off the planet Earth. Where do I go find more cotton? I need more visibility. We don't, have end-to-end visibility. I need to do a lot more scenario planning. If you, thinking about your industry, and not even just your company, but just your industry in general, what capabilities come to your mind in terms of that, hey, these are very much needed? And we also, Kate, these days hear some contrarian thinking, whereas people will say, oh, demand forecasting is a thing of yesterday. So because, there's so much error in forecast, we need different techniques. We need, some adaptive supply chains. We need to do, more agility. We need to be more agile, whatever, that means for a given context. But it would be so interesting to hear from you that if you have to pick 3 to 5 or, whatever number of capabilities that are needed more than ever, what would be your pick of those capabilities?
Yeah, so I would say first and foremost, we have to live a little bit in between the foundational today and what we're looking for in the future. So as somebody who manages an innovation practice, I just today was having a conversation with the CEO of the Americas in my company, and sometimes things that are coming up are too far out there, right? Because we're so focused on the foundational because we need to be. And the conversation we were having is, how do we keep these forward-looking things moving while we're also doing these foundational things? So I think the number one thing for the retail industry, and probably a lot of industries coming out of COVID, is how are you doing the foundational things better, first and foremost, right? So what are the cracks that you found in this COVID, in this pandemic, that you're now able to go after and figure out how to fix for the next time? So when we say foundational, yes, some of that, could be demand forecasting in its very, sort of basic sense, right? Yes, we found some cracks in that because many people are forecasting, let's say by channel, if they're multi-channel, instead of by overall demand. Well, that's a problem when your channel mix changes dramatically overnight. So that's a foundational thing that perhaps needs to happen. I think there's a lot of innovation, a lot of interesting things that will come out of that work, not just I want to, be able to print a new shirt off a USB port, which is kind of where people go when they think long-term innovation. I think a lot of it will be building on that foundation. We'll be building on, I would say the number one thing in that scope is better use of the data you have. So another trap that people have fallen into is they say, well, I need more third-party indicators. And I need those third-party indicators to be able to predict the next COVID or predict a, weather pattern that's going to change traffic to my stores. But oftentimes they're not just saying, well, I just need to look at the data I have and use it in a better way. So I think those kind of things are going to be what's really next. Everything else is going to be happening in the background, and all of those things around, nearshoring and being more on demand and being agile are important as well. But nothing is a be all end all solution. Agility is expensive. Like, let's just be honest, right? You can be agile and you can do on-demand manufacturing when you're Tesla and you're selling your cars for the price point you are. You can't do that with toothpaste, at least not every day. So how do you start to use the data you have to say, what's appropriate agility? What's appropriate innovation? And what stays low and slow? And what do we, manage our business in that model in that way that's more foundational versus what piece of that business is going to be more aspirational?
Yeah. How do organizations prepare for it? So especially in this day when workforce is mostly remote or almost remote, how do you bring people together? What kind of skills, thinking, ways of working will be needed for people, the most important asset of a company, to come together and think about innovation and figuring out whatever it is that needs to be figured out?
I think, I learned in COVID how important the people element really is. I can do my job fully remotely. So I am mostly, doing conversations, which can easily move from in-person to Zoom. I'm attending conferences and meetings where I can see things on a screen. But the efficacy of that has really dwindled. I would say that the spontaneous, informal conversations that lead to really great ideas are a lot harder in this environment. And getting back together with, not even just your own team, but other industry leads that you don't bump into at conferences anymore. I'm still going to the same conferences that are run out of Silicon Valley with some of these accelerators with my counterparts at Kohl's and at TJX and all of these other big retailers. But I'm not having the hallway conversations that I had a year ago when I physically went to California. So I think that what's going to be really important coming back out of this is really understanding and making the time and saying, again, just because we were able to keep the lights on with everyone being remote, it doesn't take away from those spontaneous, informal conversations where real innovation lies, where real connection lies. That to me, I think is going to be very important going forward. But I do think, there's a lot of things we can do remotely as well, right? So, that's work, that's shopping, that's engagements. It's all about, again, what's that right mix and what's the appropriate setting for the appropriate conversation or the appropriate engagement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I also think that it's not going to be that just remote only is going to be the solution. I think it would be some hybrid, some creative mix, sometime in the office, sometime working from home. I think it will settle into some new equilibrium. Right now, I think everybody is, especially in the tech companies, more in love with, okay, people are, sometimes inwardly focused and all that good stuff. So we, in the tech industry, when we conduct surveys, people almost think working from home as a given. But I think over time, it will come back to some kind of an equilibrium, because you need both that, to your point, creativity has that spontaneity, that non-linearity, you just run into somebody totally unplanned, unpredictable, you talk about something, some spark happens, and hopefully then if colleagues are disciplined enough, they note it down and they turn that into some kind of an action and don't let it just go by the wayside. No, I'm totally with you on that. It would be interesting for our viewers, like, Kate, to know, generally in your industry, how are supply chains organized? Supply chains are on the top of everybody's mind. And then as we talk to colleagues in different industries, we find out that if you look at supply chains from the whole supply side or facing your suppliers, or your demand side facing off to your customers, or in the middle, marketing and sales planning and product innovation, that there is one of them generally have a modality or a strong presence. In some supply chains, the demand just drives it. So then everybody says, oh, we are so demand driven. Other supply chains, just supply side is so, complex and whatnot, that just takes all the finite resources and energy. And then in other cases where people have such awesome products and whatever, marketing and sales, they run the show. They say, whatever it is that we come up with, it is going to sell. So it's all just about managing of the brand and whatnot. It would be good to know how the supply chains that you come across in your industry, how are they laid out? How are they organized?
Yeah, I would say my experience overall has been that the supply partnership is really strong with the business. So, one of the things I'm most proud about being an employee of PVH is how strongly we connect with all of our downstream partners. So I was fortunate enough to be a part of an integrated supply model when I was on the merchandising side of the business, and sit on the floor with some of the representatives from our factory partners, and really develop that kind of different relationship. So I think, the closer that you are to each piece of your value chain, the better off you're going to be. I think there's no, I wouldn't even say by company there's no wrong way really to, or right way to do it. I would say even by situation there may not be, right? So there are some instances where you're going to get the best value and you're going to get the best partnership by being really supply chain driven and level loading. I think there's some instances where you're going to see market demand and you're just going to throw caution to the wind and you're going to go after it, and it's going to be much more brand and product led. One of my best experiences was when I first started at PVH. I was running wholesale for the Calvin women's underwear business, and the business had just been acquired by PVH from Warnaco. We were in a turnaround, and we decided that we were going to tap this unknown model from a very well-known family and put her in this product that we didn't have a lot of. It was sort of a retro throwback item, and that person was Kendall Jenner, and that product was Calvin Klein underwear. That was our logo product that's now huge. And so all of a sudden we were chasing, and it was like, just go get as much as you can as fast as you can. We found something that's hot. Right. So even though in general, the underwear business, in my opinion, tends to be a little bit more driven by, it's a commodity in some cases, you're able to, buy goods, you're able to level load. It doesn't change a lot season by season. In that instance, it did. So I think the more flexible that we are in thinking about who should be leading when and why, the easier it is for us to be able to win in the right scenarios.
No, very, very well said. So let's go to maybe a slightly different place in our conversation. Let's talk maybe for a few minutes about data and state of data in your industry. And so a few topics that come to my mind. We were just a few minutes ago talking about the first party data versus third party data. And you made this very important point that, hey, while third-party data, if you can have it, is great. Many organizations or industries are not even leveraging first-party data. So I think part A of sort of this question is that in your industry, how good the data readiness, data completeness, data accessibility is, and probably it scores differently in different parts of an organization. So would love to hear that whole data health, data accessibility from a first party perspective. Then, Kate, from the third-party perspective, we have seen in some industries, companies coming together, forming a federated data trust, putting data in that trust, and having agreed upon uh, rules and code of conduct as to how that data will be used. Some third party runs it, but because it is a trust formed by the industry participants, and you're not, first selling the old school model of your data to the likes of a Nielsen for them to aggregate it, add time delays to that, and create indices and sell something back to you, which is then almost not very useful. We are finding these data trusts emerging. So a two-part question that, just the first party data readiness and accessibility and business intelligence that goes around that. And then this notion of data trust, where you can have a lot of industry data and everybody can benefit from those models or things that you can compute with that. So would love to hear your perspective on both of those topics.
I think right now it's a very timely conversation to be had. There are a lot of conversations being had about data trusts and what could happen in data Switzerland. How do you make that work? How do you have a third party manage it? I haven't personally seen a ton of these concepts come to fruition. I think it's a great idea, but I think then you start to get into different rules of the road that make it challenging, right? Whenever you get into a partnership with more than two parties, how are you going to solve some of these issues? Can my brand say, well, I'm okay syndicating data to you, person X, but it can only be used here, but then the other partner has different syndication rules, and then how does that work? So there are a lot of different, I think, nuances that still would need to be figured out for that to really be a scalable idea. But I think it's incredibly exciting. I think, especially as somebody who, in North America, my company is a very large wholesale business. We have a lot of incredible wholesale partners that we work really closely with to drive our business within the region. And they actually have most of our customer data. So how do we work with them to understand our own customer? And how do we work with them to better be able to use that information to build product that's going to drive their business faster and things that are going to make them more successful at the same time? And how do we do that in a way that's appropriate given all of the guardrails and guidelines around how data needs to be managed today? I would say that on the first party data journey, obviously there's a lot of environmental and regulatory factors that are constantly changing the landscape. So the more you can just really understand with positive intent how you need to use that data to be successful, how you are leveraging it in a really ethical, appropriate manner and doing it in a way that's going to be beneficial to the consumer, beneficial to the brand, that's really critical. So I think many times people also think about first party data as, you're going to find all of the information about your business sitting in that data. And you're not. You're going to find a lot of things, but you're going to find a lot of things about people who are already in your funnel. You're not going to learn about people who are buying like products elsewhere, but not from you, which is interesting too. And that's where I think each of these data layers, first party, third party, if you want to call my data sitting with a retail partner, second party, I think all of those layers are critical, and you're going to pull on different levers depending on what answers you're trying to get. And you're also going to pull on them depending on level of comfort and data clarity in each of those different pieces of the funnel. It's definitely a challenging time because it's not just about consumer data. It's about how are you using, again, consumer data for the right use cases. How are you using other data sets that you have? I mean, my gosh, how interesting is it to understand how FOB by category changes year over year? And is that a leading indicator to say how certain category shifts are going to happen in the apparel market? It is. but that's not the consumer voting for it. That's, the industry voting for it. So how do you take those different types of data sets and make them work for you given unique problems and unique situations?
No, absolutely. What is your take on visibility part of the data? When I talk to people, I still many times run into this pattern where there is no shortage of uh, data warehouses, data lakes, no shortage of uh, visibility tools like Tableau or Power BI or whatever the tool of choice is. But when you look at the situation and you ask a question that, is this organization uh, intelligence rich, and you still find that many organizations are still pretty intelligence poor, while they are tool rich and they are data rich, they are still pretty intelligence poor. So would love to hear at first, what is your take on your own industry? And then what are some practical advices that you have for people to say, okay, how to have better eyes, better visibility. Uh, it's one of the fundamentals, to make smart decisions, you need timely and mostly accurate information, some single version of truth. And in the absence of that, then you are making suboptimal decisions. And so love to hear what's your observation and, on this whole data richness, intelligence poorness, poverty that is out there.
Yeah, I think data is a really powerful asset that isn't always properly used. And when I say that, it's by no fault of anyone in the industry and how they're thinking about it. It's more so, I think, sometimes the very human element of being like, wow, I want to understand everything and I can do all these different things gets so overwhelming, you end up not being able to move, with what's right in front of you. An example I'll use is I personally got very excited when I first got a lot of exposure into the AI space about all the things that I could do with it. I'm formally trained in more of a data financial industry. I was a planner when I started in the retail industry, so I had, my geek out moment. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can just imagine. I started to do scenario planning in my head of all of the crazy things I could do. And I was fortunate enough that I work for a very smart man who said to me, how about you just tell me where I need more smalls and where I need more larges? And I was like, well, that's really boring. And he was like, right, but like, why don't we just use the data we have to solve a problem that's super clear, that's right in front of us?
Yeah.
And that, to me, that was the biggest unlock, right? The first thing we did was just do a very quick test utilizing, again, I was like, oh, I can pull in, weather patterns, and I can pull in, if you're closer to this type of business, you have this type of profile. And it was like, nope, just look at your own data, look at your own patterns, and figure out where you could put more smalls and where you could put more larges. And it worked. And I think that's the biggest thing, that a lot of times, you get sidetracked by the shiny tools, you get overly excited about all of the crazy things you could do that just make you feel genius, and they're super fun. But you have to just start with the, okay, what's a really quick win for me? And how do I use that? And how do I build upon it? And what you find when you do that is not only that you have a better way to use even very, simple data sets. Not only is that an opportunity, but you're actually going to get so much value out of that you're going to start to see other things in your business that you didn't realize. So you may say like, oh yeah, my data downstream isn't great, but my product data is great. Well, when you start to get in there, you start to realize, oh, if I had gone more complex too soon, I wouldn't have known that some problems in my data exist. And when I don't know problems in my data exist, I start making bad decisions. So if I start small, I start simple, I actually know when something's a little bit wrong, and I know where there's cracks in my data, and I know where I need better governance. And so you start to be able to, again, build this foundation of things that are going to be really powerful to then let you do, whatever Black-Scholes, Monte Carlo simulation you want to do on underwear, and, go enjoy. But I think the first piece really is just, how are you taking very simple data to make very simple daily decisions and doing it in a way that's just a little bit smarter?
In your, so let's maybe talk a little bit about AI. In your experience with AI, uh, have you seen more success working with master data attributes, meaning all the rich attributes that define customers, consumers, products, channels, clustering those attributes and figuring out what groups, generate what behavior and that sort of a thing. So we have seen a lot of success in that in the industry. Or sometimes people are using a lot more transactional data and they are doing some modeling with that. Suddenly, you end up using a combination. So love to hear that in your innovation experiments or AI experiments, what kind of data you are using from a master data or transactional data or metadata perspective. And then what kind of use cases or what types of questions you are trying to answer with the data and the ML methods.
Yeah. So I am not a statistician, but the very little that I know about statistics is the more variables you put into something, the more complex, messy, and likely inaccurate it's going to end up being. Because all of a sudden you can't really find what correlation is. And I think that's one of the challenges that I've found in AI is that what you just asked, are you using, transactional data, attribute metadata, are you using consumer data? If you were to ask anyone in the business, they'd say, well, I want to use all of it. It's like, okay, but then you don't know what's driving what. The best thing to do is to say, okay, what's the problem I'm trying to answer? And what's going to be the most logical first data set to use and start just using that. So again, my example of I need more smalls. Okay, well, I don't actually really need to know as much about the attributes if I just need to know one attribute, which is size. I don't need to know quite as much about the consumer because I have the history of what transacted, what didn't. So if I can just use transactional data to answer that one question, I'm probably going to learn the most as quickly as possible. I'm going to learn 70% of what's driving what. That other 30 is going to be super interesting, and you're going to get that diminishing, the diminishing scale of returns as you continue to add those variables. But it really is about, okay, this is the problem. What's the most likely data that's driving it? Let's use that and let's just start there. Same thing, we could pull transactional data and deep attributing and go down that rabbit hole on what's making our consumers kind of tick and what demographics are doing what. Or you can just look at a very simple product set and say, okay, what consumers are buying which products, and we can start to delineate why. And I think that's really where the team has been incredibly smart to not bite off more they can chew and to say, nope, we can just start with something easy. We can just be able to then understand it well enough to say, I know how to iterate upon this. I know how to scale this. I know how to make this more impactful versus making it, I think, as flashy as sometimes people want to make it. As soon as you say AI, everyone gets very excited because it's, they're expecting, not just, pressing a button and having everything done for them. They're expecting robots to bring it in on a silver platter and everything's going to be amazing. When it's really just, it's all about how you're training it. So of course, it's all about like the questions you're asking it. If you're asking it a silly question and you're giving it the wrong information to answer it, you're not going to get what you need.
Yeah, no, it's very true that this whole thing about shiny methods versus what is practical and what can be done right now. So when I talk to a lot of people, Kate, in the industry and survey people, I also find out I yet have to run into a big corporation that is using or even have a need to use deep neural networks to do anything.
Nope.
In many cases, relatively simple methods that may be more advanced statistics or statistical machine learning, the good old classification, clustering, regression, time series methods with some data, hopefully with that quality of that data to be high, you can make a lot of impact very quickly. And then today when I see application of this current wave of AI and deep machine learning and whatnot. It's more on the then consumerization side of things, where if you have a lot of images or videos or sound signals or speech signals, and you're trying to create more consumer-facing technology. I see a lot of applications there, or sometimes even scientific embedded applications as well. But for business problems, sales planning, S&OP, supply chains, product marketing, many of these other methods, they are very effective, and sometimes don't get the shiny object score. And it's also, I think I would like to mention that there are two methods that, in my opinion, they are very powerful. They are old methods, and as of late, people are not using them much. So we all, if we go back to our MBA days, we know the optimization and operations research and the solvers in Excel to compute stuff. So all those optimization methods, they are very powerful, but they are being used less and less. And I think that if companies use optimization methods more, they have the power to compute very powerful policies and results, and they can be used in combination with statistical ML. I also don't see too much use of natural language understanding, natural language generation in the context of these modern methods and whatnot. And NL has been around for some time. So that's, I always mention to people that, hey, in your choice of tools, think about how optimization in your architecture can help solve problems, and similarly, how natural language can enhance the visualization or answerability or communication aspect between a system and its human users. So no, I'm 100% with you. I'll want to ask you this question. So we now all live in this universe where people would say, oh, my company lives on Slack. Oh, my company lives on Teams. My company lives on, Google Suite or whatever somebody's collaboration platform is. And since we all are spending all their time on these collaboration platforms, I think there's a need to figure out how to optimally use them and what are the best collaboration practices, and how, in this sort of new post-COVID world that we live in, how to achieve productivity and creativity when we are living on Slack, for example. So we are looking into it and figuring it out that, hey, how can we become more productive, more creative in this new setting using these collaboration tools? So would love to hear your perspective on, and then what it is that you are seeing, or in terms of best practices being talked about, that, okay, if you all are going to live on Slack or Zoom or tools like that, then what things we can do or try to increase the productivity quotient and the creativity quotient?
Yeah, I don't think that collaboration tools are any different in terms of how you select them, manage them, than AI tools. I think at the end of the day, it's about people. It's not necessarily about the tools. So I think sometimes we get bogged down again with looking for this perfect tool that's going to solve, how we're communicating. It's about people, the culture that you need to have, and sometimes that's different even within an organization. And I'm always in the market for this. I'm a big fan of like really good to-do list apps that are integrated, that do this, and it just makes me feel like very productive. But realistically, I'm most productive when I'm sitting virtually or in person with the team, with my cross-functional peers, talking about different opportunities, things we're going to do, versus trying to, manage that always in a super organized, systemic way. Because I think you lose some of that spark you talked about when you're just worried about the tool. I think sometimes having some of these imperfect digital tools allows you to then have those conversations that give you the spark. It allows you to have more of that personal connection, because you start to take out all of the noise that actually sometimes creates some of the excitement when everything's too perfect. So I would say I love all these tools. I think they're amazing. I think they definitely make our lives easier. I think it's really exciting. But if you don't have the right people behind the tools, you don't have the right process in your business on how you use them and how you talk to each other, it kind of doesn't matter. I think when we start to go back to a hybrid world, I think we're really going to see that, because we're going to start to realize, oh, it's about the situation when I want to use the tool versus I don't. Right now, we're being forced to use tools for every situation. So we're trying to find tools that can work in every situation. That just doesn't exist. It'll be interesting when we go back and we realize what we really need to rely on and kind of what we prefer to not.
Kate, in your opinion, what is the future role of a business analyst that, they sit at that crossroads of business process innovation, technology, IT, they face off to customers, data scientists, and they have to learn some of this new stuff. Sometimes you hear terms like citizen data scientists and whatnot. So if I'm a business analyst and my tool of choice is Excel, and I have whatever skills that I have, how do I uplift myself, grow myself, and how should organizations think about taking their business users and taking them to a higher level of analytical capability, creative thinking? So what is the future for business analysts?
Yeah, so I would liken it to the same way that I think about strategists, and I think about strategy roles as well. So all of these tools and all of these methodologies and all of this theory and a hypothesis that we tend to live in these types of roles that are very process strategy, analytics oriented. I think they make for a lot of people to be great architects who are building really beautiful blueprints on what they think should happen in this perfect simulation that they've made. I think we sometimes do a disservice when we don't make sure that we're pulling people out of those simulations and saying, it isn't just about the blueprint, it's also about actually building and executing. So imagine if you were a homeowner wanting a new kitchen and you hired an architecture firm to give you a new kitchen, and they handed you the blueprint and then they said, here's your kitchen.
Huh.
Well, no, that's not my kitchen. Where's my fridge? I don't have a countertop. And it's like, well, here's your blueprint. Here's what needs to happen. I think we need to start to make some of those strategists, those business analysts, those process leads into GCs who are picking up the hammer, who are showing the business owners or the homeowners how they can be successful, how they can use their kitchen, how they can build their kitchen, how it can be functional for them, versus just handing those blueprints over. I think, again, the more we rely on tools instead of people and process, the more we get stuck in that blueprint world instead of really thinking, put your head up, business analyst, and be a problem solver.
Yeah. So what would be your advice for corporations, people who implement these talent development policies? What sort of things they should think about or do to exactly do that as we all come out of COVID and settle into some new equilibrium, whatever that happens to be. So how should organizations go about doing this?
I think sometimes we typecast a little too much. And I think we get the most benefit out of being more generalist and giving more opportunities and more breadth rather than depth all the time. Now, I'm not saying, my industry, I would use the example of, okay, clearly I'm more of a numbers, analytical, strategic thinker, I have at one point run a merchandising team, but you really don't want me sitting there designing a line for you, right? I'm not that person. That's fine. But I've, managed wholesale, I've managed planning, I've been in operations and strategy, in analytics, in consumer insights, and all of those things have a lot of common threads. And where I find myself and my team members who've gone through the same process being most successful is when we can then incorporate some of the learnings from those different things into what we're trying to do next. So I think sometimes we say, oh, that person's a planner. So there's a merch role open, or there's a supply chain role open, or there's something else open. That's not a fit for them. They're a planner. The more we, especially early in people's career, let them have exposure to different types of things, get their hands dirty, really operating and rotating and understanding the pieces, the better they're going to be at being senior leaders who are thoughtful and strategic and know how to actually problem solve. You don't have to be a chief supply chain officer to understand how supply works if you've been given enough exposure to it, and you can then be a head of planning who understands the nuances and knows what you can and can't do, or maybe should or shouldn't do. I think those types of more rotational views and having a little bit more breadth rather than depth are important in a multitude of industries.
How much automation do you currently see in your industry? So many people subscribe to this notion that, hey, automate the obvious, whatever can be automated or is mechanistic or deterministic, try to automate that and not use human calories and creativity on that. So would love to hear that, in your industry, what processes are ripe candidates for automation. And then just maybe an extension of that question is, over the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years, what do you see in terms of the AI people interplay, how the two are going to work together to achieve certain outcomes? What would each do from a role perspective where it all adds up and it is synergistic and it creates amazing outcomes?
I think it's interesting. So we're at an inflection point where a lot of individuals are concerned, again, that machines or AI is going to take their jobs. But everyone was concerned about that in the Industrial Revolution too. And people still have jobs and arguably have more jobs and work more hours. So I think it's not about saying, okay, well, we're going to automate you out of a job, or we're going to automate all these other things. I think what's going to happen is automation is going to just create more opportunities when it's done correctly, to be able to say, oh, wow, I always only did this one thing. Now I automated it because it was, to your point, obvious. And so now I have these 3 other things that now I feel like I should be doing because that's what it's telling me to do. Oh my gosh, it's even more than I thought. And there's even more opportunity for me to even, be more robust in my thought process. So I do think that, automation and automating those more simple problems is going to continue. I think sometimes human nature, we tend to want to automate the complex that we can't understand ourselves, and we want to not automate the simple because we can do it ourselves, and that makes us feel better. And that's something that definitely I think we need to make sure we get out of our own ways. It's very easy to say, no, this simple thing that gets automated, I understand it so well, I want to keep putting my hands back on the wheel. So how do we make sure that we don't do that? How do we make sure we truly are automating things where, you don't need a person in there? You need a person always to read that output, right? You never want the machine to do all of these things and come up with this big grandiose theory, idea, recommendation, and just go. Right? You want the person who understands context at the end of it to make sure, oh, this is right, this is wrong. So if we don't have people who are continuing to grow and learn and understanding, they're not going to be able to have that context to be able to do it. So kind of going back to the, oh no, I'm going to get automated out of job concern, you're not, because the machine, no matter what, is never going to be able to always weigh every pro and con with enough context you have as a human to make a better decision than you would every pass. There's going to be a need. It's funny, planners, whenever you bring AI in the first couple times, planners get very nervous. They're like, you don't need a planner. If I'm not in Excel, you don't need me anymore. It's like, that's not true at all. Your job is going to be more strategic,
Yeah.
more clearly process driven, more people driven, and less Excel driven. And that's great. That's a good thing.
How is you think with coming out of COVID, uh, globalization is going to evolve, whether it is uh, manufacturing or maybe more emphasis on regional planning, when you see potential supply chain disruptions. Uh, so different people are thinking about it, trying to build some adaptive supply chain capabilities, some robustness, resilience against what if this happens, what if that happens. How do you see that uh, impacting your industry, and what new models of globalization, regionalization, localization you see emerging in the years ahead?
That is an incredibly complex and loaded question, Amjad.
I know, I know.
What's going to happen? Get your crystal ball out. Let's talk about what the world's going to look like. No, so I kind of go back to, I think it's all about mix, right? It's about all of these things, right? Be it globalization as a concept and as a executionable tool, localization as another tool, let's say in the toolkit. It's all about like mix and which problem you're trying to match it up with, right? So we are a global economy. We live in a global world, and there are many things that will constantly need to be global, right? There are many things that are going to be global because it's appropriate for consumers, it's appropriate for workforce, it's the most economical. And I don't think that's going to change. I think, you can say, okay, I'm going to have robots knitting sweaters, but those robots are still expensive. And you still need to buy the materials, and you still need to take a bet on commodities. So you're never going to be able to just remove all of those different factors. What I think is going to happen is we'll get to a place where, depending on the goal, the mix, the price, the end result, the consumer need, you're gonna start choosing different methodologies to reach those goals. But you're never going to have there be a be all end all solution. It's never going to be everything is localized, everything is global. All of our clothes are made by these knitting machines that just automate things, and you just put a USB port in, and that's what you buy, and you have it in your garage and you print it out. Could that happen someday? Yeah, it probably will. Is that going to be 100% of any product industry? No, because there's going to be different purposes for different paths.
No, very, very true. So maybe as we bring our conversations to a closure, some fun tangents. So I have picked up this one for our chat. So wearable computing and wearable sort of, this new trend where the fabrics of tomorrow and what we wear, a lot of compute power, gesture computing, sensing, those types of things. People are experimenting with that. How do you see the future of fabrics and future of sustainability, wearable computing, all those things? Suddenly there's this trend that computers are getting smaller and smaller, and then if you keep plotting it out, eventually they are going to disappear, meaning they will not be very visible. They will be everywhere. They will be in my shirt, they will be in my glasses, they will be in my ears, and if we let Elon Musk have his way, if he would put implants, he would bore holes in everybody's skull, and we'll have those neural implants, maybe not anytime soon. But there's a lot of innovation happening in that regard, still very early days. So we'd love to hear your take from an innovation perspective, any experiments that you are part of or are thinking about or want to do, along those lines. So maybe that would be a good place for us to, bring our conversation to an end.
Yeah, my team has done a ton of research in this space. So this is actually a really exciting topic that I have not been able to talk about since before COVID, because you can imagine it ended up on a back burner when there was a lot of other things going on. But so I think there are so many interesting use cases for wearable technology that we don't think about, that we should. So I think about, when, Google came out with all of their wearable technology and the things they did, and the team that's running that out there is incredible. They have an incredibly smart leader who just understands like the technology, how it should work, what the future is. But I think the challenge was, it's super interesting, but it's not necessarily necessary. So it's great to be able to, swipe your jacket and change your music, but is that much better than just hitting the volume on your headphones? Like those are super cool things that, don't get me wrong, I tried it. It was super fun. But is it worth the incremental cost of having to pay for the computing in the garment? That's to be determined. It definitely is for some consumers. It probably isn't for all consumers. But then you start to think about real world applications that don't have a better solve today, and then that's where it gets exciting. So, one of the things that is incredibly exciting and humbling that the Tommy Hilfiger brand did was get involved with adaptive apparel. So, get involved with a company called a charity called Runway of Dreams. This amazing woman who realized that clothing is not appropriate, or all clothing and all items are not appropriate for all people. And so when you think about different capabilities or disabilities that people have, how do you start to create a wearable environment that's appropriate for them? Imagine if you could create a sensor in jeans that could trace different electron muscle movements that could potentially be a notification you're going to have a seizure, right? That's interesting. That's a use case that's super compelling. That makes a lot of sense. What if you could make a sports bra that had, all of the great things that are in your Fitbit, but also could detect other, micro movements in your body that potentially could be an indication of a health problem. So, your heart rate. I've been monitoring your heart rate every time you've exercised for the last 6 months. In the last 2 weeks, it's slightly different. Something's wrong. I'm going to alert you. Those types of things, when it comes to health and medical for wearables, to me is a really interesting untapped market that will grow quickly. I think the kitschy cool stuff will happen. I love it. I think it's super fun. But you're kind of priced out on a lot of that stuff with mass consumers. But where there's a real reason and way, some of this wearable stuff is just going to be life-changing for consumers. And that's where it gets very exciting, for sure.
It's awesome. Anything else, Kate, you want to talk about? Any advice, word of wisdom, things that you would like people to try in your industry or industry in general? So anything that you want to, any other thing that you want to talk about that we haven't covered in our conversation?
The biggest thing that always excites me, and the thing I always say when I'm kind of given that open-ended question, at least in an innovation standpoint, is everyone's an innovator, right? So even though big companies have innovation teams, just spend a week thinking about what you wish was different in your day, and start to think about what you could do differently in your job and innovate against that. Right? I think that's the most exciting thing, is every person's an innovator. Every problem you see, you could potentially be the solution for. And if you go out into the world with that mindset where you're just looking at every problem as an opportunity, not just in your job, in your daily life, I think that becomes a very exciting way to live, but it also makes you a very valuable person for your company, for your career. So just always be an innovator. There's always an opportunity for that to happen.
Kate, thanks for being so generous with your time. This was a real fun conversation. I learned quite a few things, especially, when I'm going to listen to this a few times, especially when you talked about that, hey, you don't need deep neural networks. With just the first party data that you have and known methods, a lot can be done, and you don't have to wait. You can make that happen. I think that was an awesome thing that you said. And then this whole thing about that, okay, there are medical or other use cases when it comes to this concept of adaptive clothing and wearable computing. So fun stuff, and everybody, to your point, can be an innovator. Thank you, Kate, for your time today. Much appreciated.
I appreciate being invited. I had a great time. Thank you.